Hi everyone, today we're going to be talking about writing the project scope statement. This is a very bare bones documentation of what the project is about. If you have a prospective sponsor or partner, they can see what you're attempting to do in a very basic timeline and cost structure of what your project is going to be. So you might want to have a sample to look at while we're talking about this. We will be looking at a sample soon. There are several samples in our Talon section, or you might have a hard copy from class to take a look at while you're looking through this. And we'll look at a hard copy in a little while, a completed one. So this document starts off with a project objective. The objective answers the questions of what your project plans to do, by when you think it's going to happen, and about how much it's going to cost. Now, it's perfectly fine to put a date out later on, because at this point we don't know a whole lot about our project. Everything is being decided, and so at this point there's a lot of unknowns, so we might look for a date in the future. It's also very acceptable to say at a cost not to exceed, and put in a number that we know we won't go over, but that's still in the ballpark. We don't want to scare off any prospective sponsors or partners by having a dollar amount that's way too high. So, but taking a look at a couple of examples here, we might talk about after extensive market research, we're going to write a program that translates verbal sentences to English from Russian, or Russian to English. This project should be completed within 3 years at a cost not to exceed 1.5 million. So some things are not decided yet, so we don't necessarily know an exact cost, and we're hoping to have it done in 3 years. So it's kind of vague, and that's okay at this point. Here's a couple more examples. Again, in this one, we're going to produce a portable hazardous waste thermal treatment system in 13 months at a cost not to exceed 13 million. We don't know if we can get it done in 13 months. We're hoping, and at this point, that's what it is. Educated guesses on these, but we don't know an exact amount. We don't know exact time yet. So there's a couple more examples there. So that's the project objective. Probably the most important part of that scope statement, because most people reading down through your scope statement will read the project objective. They may not go any farther, just depending on how much time they have. If they're impatient, they may only want to read the objective and then not move any farther. So we want to make sure that that is a good explanation of what we want to do, so we get that across at the very beginning. Next are the deliverables. The deliverables of your project are those things that we expect to have as outputs. Now, they don't necessarily have to be tangible. We don't have to be able to touch them, but what are we expecting to put out through our project? This is not a how-to list, so we don't want to list it as I'm going to do this, then I'm going to do this, then I'm going to do this. It's really more of a statement rather than a list. So some examples might be specifications on a product design, or 500 printed invitations, a pilot program to test software. So we want to make statements of what we think will come out during the project. Now, they could be a thought process too. Like I said, they don't have to be tangible. It could be a decision about something. I mean, there certainly are a lot of options. Here are a few more examples. A software training schedule, a venue large enough to hold 450 guests, certainly the signed contracts or policy statements. Those are always good to see coming out of the deliverables section. But we want to be careful not to do a list of all the things we have to do. This is more of kind of a thought process of what you think will be produced. And so your prospective sponsor, prospective partner can look at this and see that you are thinking about what can come out of the project. It also is a way to see movement through the project. So definitely we want to have a thought of going from the beginning to the end and trying to find out. Now, this shouldn't be a list of 584 things. It should be a concise list. We don't want to work really hard to make up things, but what are the things that you think organically are going to come out of your project? So those are the deliverables, probably the second most important part of the scope statement. Next is the milestones. These are the significant events that happen during your project. They could certainly be tied to the deliverables, but they don't have to be tied to the deliverables, but they sure could be. So things that we know are going to happen, and we want to put a date by them. So the main difference between the milestones and the deliverables are that the milestones always have a date certain with them. When I want this to happen by, they show movement through the project that way. So when we look at this, we're going to put a date when we think this can happen. Significant events, and again, it should be organic. You shouldn't have to try to think of things. They should be just natural control points that come through your project. So taking a look at this, the testing is going to be complete by a certain date. Here's some more examples. The signed contracts are going to be handled by January 2nd of 2018. Redesign menu is going to be done by a certain time. Pilot project completed. So those with the date in there, it's very important. It's showing the milestones in your project and movement through your project. Now, are you 100% certain that those are going to work? No, you don't always know. So when we're doing the milestones, these are again educated guesses. We may hit them, we may not hit them. Hopefully we're close. As we're thinking about this, we've given it enough thought that they're going to make sense. So when we're looking at these milestones, show movement through your project in dates that are logical to when you think things can happen. You can mirror your deliverables somewhat, but definitely don't want to have items that we have to really make up to be done. So they should be very natural control points in your project. The next section are the technical requirements. This is probably the toughest section on the scope statement because it's hard to sometimes conceptualize what we're talking about here. But in kind of a nutshell, we want to think about what are the things that we have to get help with, or what are the areas that are going to take knowledge that we don't have. Technical makes it sound like it's got to be something very highly educated, but not necessarily. So when you look at these, generally, what do we need to go outside the project team to get information from? That's kind of the technical requirement in a nutshell. Here's some examples. Speed and capacity of the systems that we're using. Now that is kind of technical, but does the hotel have enough rooms available for all the people coming to our conference? That's not necessarily as technical, but certainly we're going to have to ask someone else if there's enough hotel rooms. Is the kitchen available for use during the chili supper? So technical means other information or more knowledge than we have is how we can think about that, but not necessarily always something highly skilled. Then there's the limits and exclusions, and these are just a short list of things that you want known that you are limited by or you're excluding. So limited might be our scope is limited to installing software on 25 computers. So we could limit it that way. We could also be that we're limited by time zones. If we're working internationally, we're limited by maybe language barriers. So there's a lot of things that might limit our work on the project. So if you can only use the office equipment during the hours of 8 and 5, you're limited to working on your project then. So things like that are the limits. You're limited to a specialty diet. So those are the limits. Things that we would count as exclusions would be things we're not going to do. So in other words, if we're a house builder, we're going to build the house, we're not going to do the landscaping. Software is going to be installed, but we're not going to do training for the software. We're only going to support the training to a certain amount of people or a certain time. So anything that you might see as exclusions, boundaries that you want to set for work on the project. That's what we would look at for the exclusions. The last section, and this could be the easiest, could be a little bit confusing, is the customer review. And the customer review would be who is the person that is kind of the high-level overseer of the project. They're not on the project team. They have something to do with the project, but they're not someone who's an everyday contributor. So that person can step in and say, the train's off the tracks, you need to take a look at this, or you might want to check with that person. So if you're doing a fundraising project, who's the charity official of the charity that you're doing the fundraiser for? That's a good person to have. If you're remodeling your house, who are the people who are going to move into that house? Those are good people to have. So depending on, it's generally not your sponsor or your partner. It could be, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. So who is it that can step in and help us see the focus of the project? So a couple last things about the scope statement. You want it to be brief. We don't want it to be more than 2 pages. Because again, this is a preliminary. It starts us off. There's different industries are going to have different things that they focus on. You'll see scope statements called statement of work. There's a project charter that's actually a little bit more involved than the scope statement. So this comes in a lot of different forms, and certainly the one that we do is not the only one or the one that everyone uses, because there's so many different variations. But it's just a good one, and it's a logical one for us. Taking a look at a sample here. This is a sample one that we can take a look at. Kind of going through the steps again. There's a project objective. It says the what. So a project, this project is a camping trip for a family of 4. There's the what. Everybody knows what's happening in this project. It's going to be scheduled for March 8th of 2013, and the cost is not to exceed $300. So there's the what, the by when, and the how much. If you know a dollar amount specific to the project, you certainly could use it. But at this point, it's preliminary, so we don't really know a lot. Here's a couple of deliverables. I always like to see 5, a minimum of 5 deliverables. So a reserved campsite at Yellowstone, a purchased tent that can sleep 4, a packed suitcase. So all of these are things that are going to be delivered throughout this project. So taking a look at this, where I'm getting to the end of my time, I've been talking too much, but milestones, there's some milestones here that you can kind of take a look at. Technical requirements: campsite must be large enough to house a tent for 4 people. bicycles, car firing and such, and then there's the limits and exclusions.